Do you believe in alternate universes?
You are listening to Delayed Replay.
The improvised movie review podcast. Wink.
Everything is fine here. We're all fine. Just sit tight and listen to them talk about the movies they definitely saw.
Don't delay. We have to listen right away.
Hello, listeners. I'm Steven Schinder, and this is the Delayed Replay podcast, where we review the movies that we feel like reviewing because we want to talk about them. Dang it. Now, on this episode, we are talking about the new Mutants, which got delayed a few times. I think it got delayed like 3 times, but finally came out in early April, which finally, we were finally able to see it. And on this episode, I have a guest who happens to be Zac Arnold from the Intergalactic Peace Coalition podcast. Zac, what's up, dude?
Dude, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I have always been really into movie reviews, obviously from IPC, doing that for a few years, but I just really enjoyed the stuff that I've gotten from Fox's Marvel. And this is kind of like the tail end of all of that. It's almost like an epilogue of sorts now that Disney holds the reins for all of that. And so it was really bittersweet to watch this film and kind of get that conclusion that I didn't know I wanted, but also surprisingly found out that I needed. This was a very fitting end to the saga that has been Fox Marvel, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. Like, it was kind of weird how Dark Phoenix was marketed as the last one, even though we knew New Mutants still needed to come out.
Right.
But I think not marketing this one as the last one worked for its benefit, because without the marketing, I just, without thinking about it, like teared up at the very end, and we'll get there. I saw this 4 times in the theater, once for each time it was originally supposed to come out, actually.
That's very appropriate. I of course saw it opening weekend, something like this that I've been waiting for since like 2018. I was like, freaking finally. And being an AMC A-list member, I was like grabbing my seats as soon as they were available. I went to my local theater that's got like reclining leather chairs, and I found a spot that's like right in the middle, like 2 rows from the back. I had a great view, and it was worth it to see it then. It was worth it to see it a second time. I took a date the 3rd time. Like I saw it 3 times, and it wasn't for any other reason other than I just wanted to see it again.
Yeah, like I really wanted to support this movie because...
That too.
Yeah, because, you know, even though people talk smack about Fox Marvel sometimes, and there are instances where, like, there are fair criticisms, but there are some experimental things that some of the Fox movies have done that we haven't seen quite as much of in, like, say, the MCU. And, like, I'm a supporter of going more experimental with these superhero movies, you know?
There are a couple of TV shows that have been able to do that, like Cloak and Dagger and Black Lightning have kind of gone a little bit different from what we've seen with traditional superhero TV shows. And of course, you've got like the Netflix series like Daredevil and Jessica Jones that have done different. And that's kind of what I've seen from Fox Marvel movies is they try and put a different spin on it. Obviously, the whole breaking the 4th wall and like action comedy for adults in Deadpool, and then the hard hitting dramatas and gravitas that we got from Logan. It's still one of my favorite movies of all time. Period. Like Logan itself is a fantastic movie, and we got another experiment, much like those 2 films, with a horror genre for people with powers. And I gotta say, usually when I'm watching horror, it's the kind I can make fun of, like the movie Zombies or Jurassic Galaxy or something like that. Like just terrible terrible animation, terrible acting. Like, that's the kind of B-list horror that I watch. But this one actually did a really good job of integrating the stuff that they've been building on with Fox Marvel, as far as getting involved with people with powers and making them feel accessible and real, while also experimenting with that horror genre and what it looks like for people with powers to be isolated the way they are, and how they deal with the circumstances that they're dealt.
Yeah, like these characters felt very accessible the way we were introduced to them. Like they're in this hospital, which I guess is for kids who have powers, and they're doing like this group circle type of thing, saying like what happened during their first time. And it was very dark when Sam, who becomes Cannonball, was talking about how like he jumped in the bathroom, broke the ceiling, and then landed on a teacher, and like that was the end of them. Like that was pretty dark.
Yeah, like there were a few dark moments in that circle. Like, just when you thought one was super dark, it was like another one got even darker, and then they finally like make their way around to Ileana, and like all of a sudden she just blows everything out of the water. Like, some people like Sam are feeling a bit of regret for what they did, but then you get around the circle to Ileana, and she's like, "Yeah, I killed a guy, no regrets. I'll do it again." And I was like, "Oh, okay. So some of these people are here because they don't know how to harness their powers. Ileana's probably got a good hand on it, and she's in here because she could potentially do it again, and we don't want anybody else to get hurt."
Yeah, she seems pretty indifferent about it, which caught me off guard. And I was like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about this character. And whereas like everyone else is like, oh my gosh, I need to have control of my powers. I don't know if I can fit in. And it's like a very good mix of these different characters. It's like you don't know if all of them will mesh well with each other, you know?
Right. That was the interesting thing, is as you're looking at these individuals, you know, just by how the story is intended to go. Like, you get into it, and it's a fairly straightforward plot line. You're all in here for the same reason, even though your powers are different. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? Since we as viewers know that it's going to turn into a horror flick, we also know that, you know, somebody may die. We know that they're probably going to get split off in pairs. You know, some of these things that do end up happening in the movie. But it's about what these characters decide to do, if they're going to have that chemistry that they're experimenting with in this circle. Like, it really sets the stage for the rest of the film. You're thinking, okay, well, if Rain is like reading Danielle's thoughts a little bit, then you're like, oh, these two could end up getting paired off later on in the film. If you're seeing somebody like Sam kind of being a shutout, like he's not really engaging with a whole lot of other people, you start wondering if he's going to make it out of the film and things like that. And so it was a really interesting set of exposition, fairly stereotypical, fairly straightforward, but it gives us a really good introduction to who these characters are and what they could potentially do as the movie moved forward.
Yeah, Sunspot was another one whose backstory was pretty intense. He was like in this swimming pool with his girlfriend, and like in the flashback you see like her burned hand reaching up, and it's like, holy, he mistakenly ended her. And it's like, I don't know what's gonna happen with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, when you do something like that accidentally to a loved one, it actually kind of reminds me of what Rogue did in the early 2000s X-Men. You know how they're like up in her room and making out and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden her boyfriend starts like having a seizure or something, basically. Like, obviously 2000 versus 2018, 2019 acting and CGI and all that sort of stuff. There's a bit of a discrepancy there, but that's really the vibe that I got, was like, you know, Sunspot has these powers, but he doesn't know what they are or what to do with them, and it ends up killing somebody that he loves. It was a very subtle nod. You kind of have to be looking for it, but to see that little tie-in and his reaction to his girlfriend's death, very, very similar to Rogue's reaction to her boyfriend in the first X-Men movie so many years ago. Really, really well done.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about that parallel, but like you're dead on. Like it's very similar to that scene at the beginning of the 2000 movie. And
Hmm.
like, wow, like 20 years later, like who knew this film series would last that long?
That's also true. Like I'm sure that wasn't the intent when the first movie came out. I mean, obviously, I don't think Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen were thinking they were going to come back for Days of Future Past or anything like that, or that it would turn into a quote unquote cinematic universe. And yet here we are. I think we're what 10 or 11 movies into it, maybe 12 or 13 if you're including the two Fantastic Four movies, the original one and the Silver Surfer. So we got that trilogy. We got the other X-Men trilogy. We got the two Deadpools and Logan. That's 9. Plus this one is 10, and then the Fantastic Four plus the sequel. So that's what 13 movies in this universe, unless I'm missing one.
Well, if you're counting just the movies that are in the X-Men films universe, let's see, the original trilogy, First Class, Origins, The Wolverine, Days of Future Past, Deadpool,
Oh,
Deadpool
that's
2, Logan,
that's
Dark
true.
Phoenix,
He
New
oh yeah, there's Dark
Mutants.
Phoenix, so that's 14, and then you got the two
So,
standalone Wolverine movies that Hugh Jackman was in. So that
I can't remember if I said Apocalypse, but yeah, I think it's like
it's closer to
maybe 13-ish X-Men movies and like 3 Fantastic Four movies, even though those are separate.
but yeah, it's amazing how it's been able to grow into that type of a cinematic universe and how it's now finding ways to slowly blend into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's been around since 2008. I mean, technically, the X-Men universe has been around before the MCU because it got started with Iron Man in 2008 and the X-Men movie started in 2000. So it's really interesting to see how all of these things are finding a way to kind of come together. It's almost like Marvel's finally becoming a big cohesive story instead of a bunch of individual universes.
Right. And the New Mutants, I wasn't sure how well this was going to tie into the other X-Men movies, but I think it did a good job of standing on its own while also bringing in familiar faces like at pivotal moments. Like, I know we're going kind of like all over the place, but there's that one scene where all hope seems to be lost as they're like fighting the demon bear, and then Colossus comes in to like help his sister,
Mm-hmm.
Ileana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really something that unless she talks about it in the movie and she mentions her brother at one point, but we like if you're just watching the movie, you don't know who her brother is. Like she just says my brother can help us or could help us or might help us, something like that. And you're like, well, who's your brother? And then, like you said, Colossus shows up, addresses her as sister, and you're just like, oh, that's who. Like it's a really like a moment of revelation kind of thing that turns out really really satisfying when he shows up. I was holding out hope that maybe the X Force would be in there, and we'd get the Teenage Negasonic Warhead, we'd get a couple of other little nods from the Deadpool universe, but I mean, it was still really cool to see that Colossus appearance, a colossal cameo, if you will. Um, but you're right. I mean, that little nod in there was just enough to remind you where this storyline is from. But like you said, not so much that it derails from the story that it's trying to tell. Because as a horror film, here's what I've noticed about a lot of horror flicks, the ones that are actually like designed to try and be really good. There are sequences, or even the entire movie is set in a way that you are isolated from the rest of the world. And it can be a hospital like this movie was. It can be an island. It can be some haunted house in the middle of the woods. It can be a zoo that is like away from the city. I mean, there's so many different ways to make you feel like there's no way to call for help. There's no way to get some assistance. And that's when all hell kind of breaks loose. And that's basically what we get in this film. We have that isolationist element that separates our main characters from the rest of the world, but at the same time, it also separates them from the rest of the cinematic universe and allows them to go on their own adventure. That was very creative and very intentional storytelling, and I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really imagine being isolated in one place for a long duration of time like they were, like just staying inside all the time. But that's a good point. Like,
I'm sorry. I chuckle at the irony because as an introvert, I stay inside as much as I possibly can.
fair enough. But yeah, that's an element that's pretty prevalent in horror. And even the first Saw movie, which is what got me into horror like years ago, that is mostly in a bathroom. And so it can be very claustrophobic and feel isolated. And it's very well done. And I liked how it was done here. And quick side note, I also really liked how for Colossus, when he was in his human form, it was Daniel Cudmore who played him in like the original X-Men movies, but when he becomes like his more colossal form, it's the guy who plays in the Deadpool movies. So great synergy there, I think.
I agree. I wasn't. I mean, honestly, I wasn't expecting Colossus in the first place, and then to get that kind of character exposition out of him and get it like a sibling connection as the two of them are making their escape, like I was very impressed with that little surprise that they threw at us. It was cool. Here's the thing that I'm still trying to wrap my brain around, and I want to get your thoughts on it. This telepathic relationship that we get between Rain Sinclair and Daniel Moonstar. That connection is one that we have seen from the likes of, let's say, Commander Riker and Deanna Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation. Being able to interact with each other through thoughts and emotions without being able to actually say any words. You notice Rain kind of trying to read the room and ends up reading Mirage's actual thoughts during the group circle, and then it just continues to grow over the course of the movie. I really wasn't expecting it to turn into I don't even know what you would call it. I don't want to call it a relationship because it seemed almost deeper than that, just by the connection that they had. But what did you make of that as like a secondary tale as they're trying to sort out this mystery, as they're trying to escape the clutches of evil and death, as they're trying to escape from the hospital? You've also got like this little side story of a couple of romantic love interests. I was very intrigued by how all that played out.
Yeah, I think the intention was to add another layer that would make this feel less generic than your typical, like, say, slasher flick, where you might have a couple characters who sneak off and fool around and then bad stuff happens to them. But here, it doesn't feel like they're going that direction. Like, they actually talk to each other and get to know each other better and get in each other's heads. And it also surprised me that the group circle scene lasted a half hour. Like, I didn't even notice because I was just so enveloped.
How did you finally figure that out? Did you have to time it during one of those times that you were watching or something?
So it was like when I was Googling what people were thinking of the movie when I got home after the first showing, and there was this article that was like, the scene lasted a half hour and barely anyone noticed. And I was like, wait, is that true? And so the second time I timed it on my phone and I was like, oh, it is the half hour. And
wow.
It's like when you focus on character and you make people care about the characters, it just makes time fly, you know?
Well, that's also so antithetical from what you get from a traditional horror flick. A lot of times it can be very superficial, it's very casual, it's very blasé. It's like just enough to get you intrigued by the characters, but not so attached to them that you don't feel as much when and if they should end up getting killed off in the film. Like that's like the weird balance that I've noticed is you do get some of that character exposition, but it's never enough to actually satisfy you the way like a drama film gets you super involved in the characters. Like one of my favorite dramas was a German film called The Lives of Others. And it spent so much time paying attention to two or three main characters over the course of the film that when the payoff finally does happen at the end, it leaves you crushed for these characters. Like, you get so involved in what's going on that you don't even recognize that it's a foreign film and you've been reading captions the whole time because you're so enamored with the storyline. I haven't really gotten enamored with storylines from a horror film all that much. It's usually enough to get interested and then lose interest as soon as they die. But to dedicate this much time to getting to know the characters, getting to understand their thoughts, their tendencies, their backstory, it really leaves a bigger impact when they face peril in the second half of the film.
Yeah, I feel like with some horror movies, it's possible to fall into that trap of feeling generic and having people in these deadly situations without caring enough about them.
Mhm.
But I feel like there are some recent ones where they try to make you care more about the characters. Like on the previous episode, me and another friend were talking about A Quiet Place 2 and also a bit of 1. I feel like that's a great example.
That was another good movie, I gotta tell you. Oh my gosh. I just really enjoyed the first one, and so I had always been looking forward to the second one, and I don't feel like it disappointed, like just me personally. But the interesting thing that we learned during that circle time, if you will, you start figuring out that everybody's powers are very, very different from each other. Like sometimes you get characters that are like either on the side of super strength like Captain America or super smart like Tony Stark. Those are your I don't know what you call it, like a dyad, like the yin to your yang, which is what we got from Civil War and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, the stuff that you get from these characters, we mentioned Sam basically being a indestructible cannonball, basically, which is the nickname that he takes on. But I mean, you've got a werewolf, you've got a sorceress, you've got somebody that plants thoughts and fears and ideas in people's heads on a whim. You've got somebody that uses energy from the sun to try and like that's how he gains his super strength, and that's how he channels his powers is through solar energy. Like it's very diverse, not just diversity in relationships, but also in powers. And I think that was another thing that made the characters so relatable is you see everything that they're capable of, and there's almost always something for somebody. You latch on to one of those types of powers because you look at them and think, wow, imagine what I could do if I had the power to implant fears in people's minds. What would I do with that power? Imagine if I could harness the energy from the sun. What would I want to do with that? I think that's one of the things that made these characters so accessible as well.
Right, I wholeheartedly agree. And we do get to a point where these characters do end up seeing their fears, and you see all sorts of crazy stuff like faces in the walls, and there's this like little Slenderman looking thing with sharp teeth. But like out of all of that, what was the most shocking to you?
You know, it's partially shocking and also just partially odd. Like I don't understand why this would be somebody's fear, but wasn't there a character? It wasn't one of the people in the circle. It was like one of the orderlies because they had like orderlies at the door, and Mirage was kind of like showing off a little bit. And at one point, one of the orderlies came over to try and hold her down and like stop her from doing her thing so that they could move on. And she just like turns and glares at him, and all of a sudden he stops, and they do like this POV perspective, and all of a sudden you're looking from his point of view at like a goggle lens with the camera. It was really creative, and you're seeing the vision from his perspective, and all it is, Literally, all it is Mirage's face has turned into a kumquat. He's afraid of a kumquat, and he's like, no, no, get away from me. Like, I don't know what that was supposed to be. Did he have an allergy? Did he get, like, hit by one as a kid? Like, why would your greatest fear be a kumquat? Like, it didn't make sense.
Yeah, like my first instinct was this is super odd and kind of unintentionally funny, but then I was like trying to piece it together in my head.
Right.
And the allergy reason did come to mind, but
Yeah.
they never outright explain it.
No, I mean, I personally am allergic to pineapples, and so if I saw a pineapple, I'd be like, oh, get it away from me, hiss. But I don't know if I would call it, like, my greatest fear. But can you also imagine how that could be somebody's Achilles heel? Like think of actual Achilles, like from mythology. He didn't have any weaknesses except the bottom of his foot. This guy could be afraid of spiders, he could be afraid of snakes, he could be afraid of ghosts, witches, werewolves, whatever. But when he is shown his greatest weakness, it's a freaking kumquat. Like, it was just, I don't know, like, is that just supposed to be some sort of is it an homage that I'm just not aware of? I'm going to have to read the IMDb trivia or something to figure that one out.
Yeah, I don't know if it was an homage. It was definitely odd. Speaking of pineapples, I'll be sure not to have you on the SpongeBob Sponge on the Run episode if that scares you.
Well, I mean, you could, but I'd have to take a couple of Benadryl before then.
I guess the most shocking scene for me was when, like, we see Magic's collection of Pink Floyd albums,
Mm-hmm.
and she uses them to slice the heads off of these monsters that, like, come after them. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this was supposed to symbolize the power of music or what, but I thought it was cool, and how she, like, later used them as, like, teleportation discs. I was like, yeah, this is the power of Pink Floyd.
Well, and then that I feel like that was also just something that was supposed to be integrated in the film in general, because didn't they use Another Brick in the Wall in the trailer when they were first pitching this movie?
Yeah, and there are a bunch of Pink Floyd references. Like, I noticed one of them had, like, a poster of the album Uma Guma, which has a cow on it. And there's also a moment where it's very intense, and they're, like, walking through the hallway thinking something's coming around the corner, and you can hear the song Waiting for the Worms, which is also from The Wall. And I was, like, really into this.
I mean, anytime you're able to integrate classics like that, I am such a fan. Like the fight scene in Thor Ragnarok where they're using the Immigrant Song. Oh my gosh, it gives me chills every time. Because I'm like, yes, this is something I can get hyped up about. This is something I can get excited about. And it's very difficult to get people hyped up and excited for intense sequences of a horror flick, because it's meant to heighten your senses. Kind of like how A Quiet Place is usually kind of geared towards enhancing your sense of hearing. A lot of horror flicks will deal with your vision, your sense of sight. And you'll have the lights flickering, and you'll be looking at your character, and then in the background the antagonist shows up and gets closer and closer. Lighting is usually one that they really, really pay attention to. But I feel like this movie also did a good job of paying attention to the sense of sound with the music and just with the approach, because Demon Bear, obviously, in his fullest form, is looking more like a bear than just about anything else. On his haunches, you can hear the creaking of the wood on the hallways as he's approaching. You can hear the click clack of his claws as he's like making his way closer or up and down the hallway. Or there's that one scene where I think it's Sam and Ileana are behind a doorway in one of the dormitories trying to get away. And they do that classic thing where there's a little bit of light shining through the bottom of the doorway, and then the shadow just kind of ends up blocking a part of it. You hear his sniffing as he's trying to figure out where they are. It's one of those breathtaking intensity, what's going to happen if he decides to break down the door kind of situations. And all you're really able to see is the shadow, but you're hearing his breath, you're hearing his snarls, you're hearing the click-clacks of the claws as he's going up and down the hallway. Like, even if you're not seeing stuff, you're still hearing and experiencing the intensity of the moment. I really, really liked that.
Yeah, they really play with the audience. There's like the click clacking, and it's like, oh no, what's the thing gonna look like? And one of the demon bear's forms was this tiny horse, and it's like no taller than a shoe, and it's like really weird to see. And so, like, for someone unfamiliar with that sight, it could potentially be unsettling. And they had like this intense violin solo during that moment, which I really dug.
Oh man, anything with violins I'm a fan of, but I do admit I had to I was kind of chuckling at the tiny horse form until he like shapeshifted into his true form. Like I feel like it was meant to be like a bait kind of thing, like a distraction. It's like, oh, it's just a tiny horse. What the hell are you doing here? And then it's like, and you're like, oh, hello. Like that part was pretty intense. But when I first saw it, the tiny horse, I'm a Parks and Rec fan. All I could think of was Little Sebastian, and I I ended up like singing the song in my head for a second there. I was like, bye bye, and then he starts growing and changing form in the hall, and I'm like, oh no 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 no. it was so funny because like as he's chasing after them, it goes from like a clip clop sound of a horse's hooves into the click clack of bear claws, and he chases them all the way down to like the end of the hallway and into something that's basically a den. And there's like one little end table by the window that's got a couple of odds and ends. I think I saw like them shuffling through stuff, and there was like a can of hairspray and a bag of mini M&Ms or something like that on there. Product placement, you know what I mean? You got to have Aquanet in there because they're your sponsor. But like they're
It's been waiting years to get sponsored in this movie.
Honestly, like it's been what 2.5, almost 3 years, something like that. But they finally got their product placement. And they're shuffling around trying to find something, and the only weapon anybody's able to find, I still don't know why this happened, because like you're people with powers use your powers, but Sunspot, God bless his soul, it was nighttime, so he couldn't harness any of the sun's energy because it was dark out, and he just started scrambling trying to find something he could use, and the only thing was a fireplace poker. And so you've got these other characters that are like standing alongside with him in this moment of truth situation, and like Rain is getting ready to like do her shape shifting because she's basically like a werewolf, and then you've got the discs kind of floating around Ileana. You've got Sam getting ready to turn into a projectile. Like everybody else is trying to find their thing that they can use to help in this battle, and Sunspot, the only thing he can do is grab a fireplace poker.
Yeah, but I think it was a good choice to set this in nighttime because I'm kind of a fan of like those scenes where like all hope seems to be lost and then the sun rises and like that Gandalf moment.
Yes, like a Two Towers moment. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, so like when the sun came up and Sunspot could like harness that energy, like you could see in his eyes that he was gaining his courage, and he was looking down at the demon bear, and he was like, "It's time for a barbecue."
As a barbecue connoisseur, I had to laugh and groan at that line.
Hashtag barbecue.
Hashtag barbecue watch. Like, that's going to end up a segment on IPC, I can promise you that. But did you notice, I only caught this on the third time. Like, it's very, very subtle. But as the sun's coming up, his eyes gradually shift. As the sun is coming up, so do his eyes change color from brown to gold.
Yeah, I didn't notice that until the fourth time around. Funny that you mentioned that.
Like it's very subtle, but it's like as he's gaining that spark of courage, as you were talking about, his eyes kind of ignite with a passion as he realizes that he's about to be able to reach his fullest potential. And that was such a cool moment for me because it's one of those things where you may have trouble that's lasting you through the night, but then hope arrives with the morning, and it was just it was cool to see. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to actually completely save him, but he saved his friends, and I think that was the coolest thing about Sunspot's character. He was probably the most selfless out of the group. Like time and time again, he's putting other people before himself. And as the sun's coming up, he realizes this is his opportunity to make the difference that he hasn't been able to make all night. And he's able to hold off the demon bear just long enough for everybody else to escape. But it turns into like a one-on-one kind of fight, and all it takes is like just hitting him enough to where he's not in direct sunlight anymore, and he doesn't have he's not able to tap into his powers fully, and it turned into like this game of cat and mouse in the den while the others were escaping. Can I step into the light? Can I not step into the light? Am I able to get this one last shot, or am I going to have to dodge him and duck him? And then he finally just ends up standing right in front of the window and just lets the demon bear come to him, and he gets killed, but he makes like that ultimate sacrifice for the group, for the good of the group, and levels a crushing blow that's enough to give them time to escape, which I thought was powerful.
So then, would you say that Sunspot was the real MVP of this cast of characters?
I would say for that particular sequence, yes. But if I was choosing like most valuable powers, I would probably give that to Mirage, because there are so many sequences where we're experiencing the fears that she's implanting in people's minds, and it's everything from kumquats to disembowelment. And there was this one moment where they're trying to make their way out of a hallway, and there's a couple of creatures of unknown origin that I wasn't able to identify. I still can't. Saw the movie 3 times. I still don't know what these things are. But she tries to connect with them. She tries to telepathically bond with them and tries to implant a thought in their minds. And the next thing you know, these weird looking creatures, they just look weird, and they start to look even weirder as their insides start coming out of them. And like they're curling up into the fetal position because all of this weird stuff is happening to them. Like they've got these intestines and stuff that are like spewing, and blood is spurting all over the place. And then you see Mirage, and you see who was with her. I think it was Rain. You see the two of them make their way to the end of the hallway, and as they get across those creatures, it cuts back to that hallway, and nothing has actually happened. All of that disembowelment was stuff that they were fearing, and we watched them experience it from their perspective. And to realize that after the fact, to realize that after they make it safely across, it was just mind-blowing at how much she had been harnessing and channeling her powers to be able to distract creatures like that and make them believe that it was actually happening to them. So, I mean, yeah, Sunspot, great sacrifice, but Mirage, absolutely fantastic powers and great use of CGI in order to bring all of that to life.
Yeah, this was pretty intense for PG-13. Now that you bring all that up, but yeah,
it was really intense, and I mean, you kind of need that in something that's designed to be in the horror genre. Like you've got to have something in there that actually scares you more than just a couple of jump scares. Like there's got to be something in there that makes you believe that this is genuinely scary, and that would be it for me. It would be that scene right there, because if it had happened to people, it might have been an R rating. It probably would have garnered an R rating, but because it's happening to these creatures that are just kind of humanoid in shape, you're able to use the CGI a little bit more to make it less human appearing, and I don't know. It just, I feel like if you had been seeing actual intestines coming out and stuff, that would probably be a little bit worse. But since it's aliens, we don't care. It just barely maintained that PG-13 rating, though.
Yeah, I mean they made the intestines green, so I guess that helped like make it seem less human.
I mean, it almost looked like Jello, to be honest. Like,
okay, so I'm not the only one who thought that.
yeah, I mean, it looked a little bit like Jello, not gonna lie, and maybe that's because of the budget. Maybe that's because they wanted to maintain the PG-13 rating. But I mean, come on, man, you can say the F word at one time in a PG-13 movie now. Do you remember, what was it, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes?
Oh, that's right.
I was very, very surprised to hear Gary Oldman drop an F-bomb in a PG-13 movie. So you can get away with a lot in PG-13 these days.
Yeah, speaking of apes, this is just a brief tangent, has nothing to do with the movie, but this was something I read about. So in the previous episode of this podcast, I mentioned that the animated movies Missing Link, Abominable, and Smallfoot could kind of be watched as an unofficial trilogy from different animation studios. But when I mentioned that, I accidentally said Link instead of Missing Link, and I thought to myself later while editing, I was like, oh, surely people knew I meant Missing Link, but is Link a movie? And it turns out there's this weird looking 1986 horror movie called Link, where a chimpanzee goes against its masters, but it's an orangutan playing the chimp, and they gave it prosthetic ears and dyed its hair. It's weird to know about.
Oh, goodness. That reminds me of Michael Crichton's book, Congo, being put into a movie. They were trying to... I think it was from the 80s or something. Tim Curry's the antagonist in that movie, for a frame of reference.
Nigel Thornberry himself.
Just about. And they use all gorilla costumes. Really bad-looking gorilla costumes for the whole thing. And I'm sitting here going, we've got the technology, thanks to the Planet of the Apes franchise, to be able to do something else with this movie, with this story. And people have loved Crichton's stuff. I mean, look at how popular Jurassic Park has been. And I'm just waiting for, I think it's Pirates Cove, and didn't he do one about a contagion or something like that? I'm just waiting for some of Crichton's other work to regain traction now that we've got the CGI to bring his vision to life.
Right. I'm glad we're able to tell each other about bad-looking movies on this podcast.
I mean, this one didn't look that bad. Aside from the Jello-like intestines, I was actually pretty impressed with the camera work and, like you said, some of the musical choices, the action, the characters and exposition. There really wasn't a whole lot to critique out of this film. I feel like the pacing was probably a little rushed towards the end because of all the time that we spent with the character exposition. You spend a half hour on the front end, things potentially get a little rushed on the tail end. So there was a little bit of a pacing concern for me, but overall, I really enjoyed the stuff that I got out of this film.
Yeah, so did I. And how experimental it was kind of reminded me of the show Legion in some places. I don't know if you ever watched.
Funny story. I actually auditioned to be on Legion.
What, for real?
Yeah. Isn't that the one that the pilot was... No, I don't know. It might be. I think it was. It's a Fox show, right?
FX, yeah.
Fox FX show. Yeah, that's the one. They actually filmed the pilot for that in the Dallas, Texas area. And they were doing open casting calls at these different talent agencies, and I went and auditioned.
Oh, wow. That's quite a story.
Yeah, I didn't get the part because they wanted me to join the talent agency beforehand. They didn't just want to help me get into this one role, which is really all I wanted. I wanted to be on an FX Fox Marvel type of a mutant show. That was really the only thing I wanted. And they wanted me to join the talent agency and do like modeling and singing and like all this other stuff. And I was like, I really just wanted to see if I could make it onto this show. And they're like, oh, okay, well, goodbye.
Marvel, if you're listening, reconsider.
Okay, I looked sharp too. Not trying to brag or anything, but I have like this custom blue blazer that I wore. It's like a royal blue dinner jacket basically. And when I was reading the parts, like I got so many different compliments on the jacket alone that I was like, okay, even if I don't get a part, maybe I'll be an extra and I can just be blue jacket guy that gets killed during the carnage or something. But nothing ever came of it, and I'm still a little bummed to this day. So, Legion's a good show, but it could have been better. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it would have been better if you were on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, Aubrey Plaza is great on that show, and it's kind of a confusing show. Like, I liken it to, like, when I tell people that they should check it out, I say that maybe you'll enjoy it as, like, an extended series of music videos, and you got stuff like Pink Floyd references in there as well. Like you have the song Mother and Breathe, and there's even a character called Sydney Barrett.
Mm-hmm.
And like even in Days of Future Past, Quicksilver had a Dark Side of the Moon shirt. So it's as if all mutants love Pink Floyd, and it's like, who can blame them?
Nobody can. any movie, franchise, TV show that gives some credit to Pink Floyd where it's due is okay in my book. Absolutely.
But yeah, like the Demon Bear gave me like Shadow King vibes, like in Legion. Like I really appreciated how like both of these things went in experimental directions, but they also don't feel like exact copies of each other.
I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of that. I'm sure there are message boards that would disagree with you and feel like it was too on the nose. But I respect the effort more than anything. I respect the effort. I respect the attempt that was made. I don't feel like if this movie had been released at the time that it was supposed to, because I think the reason Dark Phoenix got that pitch as the final installment is because this movie, before it got delayed, was supposed to come out before Dark Phoenix, wasn't it?
Yeah, I vaguely recall that it was supposed to come out like maybe a few months before Dark Phoenix, and
Right.
then it got pushed back. I think one of the reasons was to not be at the same time as Dark Phoenix and to not
Right.
be at the same time as Deadpool 2, like all sorts of weird reasons.
Well, it was a scheduling conflict within the company for a little bit, and
Yeah.
then it became a conflict with Disney because as soon as Disney bought all of Fox Marvel's properties, they wanted to have a say in how everything was being done, and so they got their fingers in on this movie. And you can kind of tell in certain instances where like things had the potential to escalate, and they dialed it back to keep it PG-13. Like the farthest they went was that scene in the hallway, and so like you can tell that Disney's fingerprints are kind of on it, especially since Fox Marvel has the precedent for R-rated movies already with movies like Logan and Deadpool. Like it wouldn't have been too impossible for this film to be R-rated, and yet they still dialed it back a little bit. So there were some Disney fingerprints on it, and you could kind of tell that this movie wasn't really supposed to communicate with Dark Phoenix anyway all that much. And so even if it had come out before then, I think it still would have done all right. But now that we're seeing it after Dark Phoenix, now that we've seen it kind of after a bit of a break in Fox Marvel, I see it almost more as an epilogue, like a tribute to some of the things that made Fox's Marvel movies the way that they are. Like, is it the best Fox Marvel movie? Probably not. I would give that to Logan. But it's a nice way of saying, "Hey, thanks for watching us for all these years. Here's something to remember us by." That's kind of how I see this movie.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much they changed once Disney acquired it. Like, there've been different reports, but I kind of suspect that maybe when the demon bear turned into like a giant gummy bear, that felt to me like a something you would see in an MCU movie to get laughs and whatnot. So I don't know if that was always there or if it was changed after the acquisition, but
I
it
mean,
was pretty weird.
imagine being a demon bear, and you're like your greatest fear is not being intimidating, and so you see yourself as a gummy bear, like that's your worst nightmare, and that was probably just another one of Mirage's illusions. But
Yeah, it definitely made sense in context, but it was still a weird
it was,
choice.
yes, of course, absolutely, I agree. It was very, very weird, but it's still you're right. It was very much in the vein of Disney. Like I said, they it seemed like they had their fingerprints on it, even though they were trying to mask it, they were trying to hide it, because Disney doesn't really like the horror genre. They really don't. I don't know if they've really tried to dive into it that much before, but it seems like every time they try to do something like that or try and do something different, it doesn't go well. And so I mean, maybe the closest would be like the stuff we see on Daredevil, but even then, that was like partially before the Disney buyout of all the Marvel properties. So I don't know where Disney has succeeded with the horror genre, and I don't really want to give them any credit for this film either, because this is probably 90% Fox's doing, and then like a little bit of touch up work by Disney at the very end.
Yeah, you raised some good points. Like, Disney is not the first studio I think of when I think horror movies. So, like, sure, they've made things like Nightmare Before Christmas, which I guess was also a touchstone, but like off the top of my head, I can't think of straight up horror movies from Disney. Like, I'm sure they've distributed some through like some of those other companies. I just can't think of one at the moment.
No, me neither. Like I said, it's not really something like when I think of horror, I'm thinking like Blumhouse, I guess, or something like that. I'm never thinking Disney.
Right, or like Lionsgate or something like that.
Yep, exactly. Which, who knows, Lionsgate could end up getting bought out eventually too.
Well, I mean, at the rate that Disney has been going, like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
That's what I'm saying. It's a possibility.
Going into, like, the end of the movie, so we have, like, the fight against Demon Bear, and I thought it was really cool when Rain finally harnessed those wolf powers and became, like, this huge, monstrous wolf, and,
Mm-hmm.
like, took down the bear and showed who the bigger beast was, and I thought that was like a very heroic end to that whole conflict against the demon bear.
Well, yeah, like I was saying earlier, Sunspot's sacrifice really only gave them a little bit of time to kind of get away, if you will, but it didn't actually kill the demon bear, and so he was still in pursuit, but it severely delayed him, severely injured him. I don't feel like he was necessarily at his best, obviously, because of the damage that had been done to him by Sunspot, but it was still a really, really epic fight because I don't think Fox Marvel has really been known for like their creative CGI, just useful CGI. But this time they got really creative, being able to take someone as petite but fierce as Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones fame, if you know that series, to take someone like Maisie Williams and basically create a werewolf around her using CGI. And you still see components of her face during the fight. You hear a little bit of like a fierce, high pitched roar in the midst of the wolf's snarl during the fight. It was really, really creative the way that they integrated her human form with the CGI form of her wolf. And Yes, finally recognizing the beast within was such a great payoff because she had been kind of containing herself for the most part and not really been harnessing or channeling her powers very much. It seems like a very fight or flight type of reaction from her, and she chose to fight in that moment rather than choosing flight. And it was such a great moment because in the midst of all of the climactic stuff that we had been experiencing, we really had not seen Wolfsbane in the fullest, truest form until that fight. And when we did, it was so satisfying.
Yeah, and I'm kind of sad that we might not see Wolfsbane like this. If I mean, I don't know what their plans are, but I'm not sure if they'll go ahead and make the sequels that the director of this wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess brings me to the post-credit scene. What did you think of the direction that they took with that, given the context of like all the behind-the-scenes stuff?
I mean, yeah, that's the thing is you kind of have to take into account the fact that this movie got delayed, and so in doing so, the payoff of the post credit scene it fell a little flat for me. Like it made sense in the context of the cinematic universe that we've been experiencing up until this point. Um, but to bring those students, because Colossus eventually comes in and helps finish the job, and you're meeting him and seeing how he's able to help them finish that escape, and he brings them back to the X Mansion. Like, it's a little too on the nose for me. It's just a little too on the nose because we've had everything so far away from everything else. Like, it felt like they were practically in Wyoming. We had no idea where these people were. Like, they were just they who knows what part of the world they were isolated in. And then suddenly Colossus is able to bring them to the X Mansion for safety. Like, are we supposed to expect them to join the X Force in the sequel? Are we expected them to like train as students at Xavier's school? What part of the timeline are we in at this point? Have we experienced both of the Deadpool films at this point? Are the students supposed to be like some of the students in the background during Deadpool 2? Like, that part was just a little convoluted for me. It made sense considering this movie was supposed to happen before Dark Phoenix, and Dark Phoenix was supposed to finish things off. But bringing them back to the mansion just felt a little too on the nose for me.
Yeah, I think that maybe this takes place in like post Deadpool 2 because of how Colossus looks.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess depending on whether or not you count like this promotional material around the time of Days of Future Past as canon, apparently Colossus was born around the time of Chernobyl, which explains his mutation.
Yeah.
So he'd be kind of young in Dark Phoenix, I think.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I have mixed feelings about this post-credit scene because I get that it's the school, and like intentionally or unintentionally, we're seeing the school for the last time, so kind of coming full circle. But
Right.
I'd heard like other directions that this could have gone. Like, I heard they wanted John Hamm to play Mr. Sinister, but they like never figured out how to put him in any of the X-Men movies, even though they like had little references here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I did like how it, well, I guess liked and disliked because we're probably not getting a sequel, but how like zoomed out from the mansion and you see the back of the sky standing across the street, and he turns around and it's Antonio Banderas, who is supposedly supposed to be playing Sunspot's dad here, and he's part of like some team of like antagonistic mutants.
That would give us the conflict that we would need for the next film, because his son is dead.
Right, and I feel like if he wasn't like as bad before, like the death of his son would like give him that pushing point over the edge.
See, like, if we actually get a sequel greenlit for this, it would be awesome. Like, I think that would be absolutely the way to go, because then you're able to integrate some of the thriller horror along with like a revenge plot, and you're integrating it with the X-Men franchise because they're at the mansion now. Like that would all tie together so well. It would bring it all together so well. But you're right, we're probably not going to get anything after this. Thank you, Disney.
Right. Like, I would hope that the reception for this makes Disney and Marvel Studios reconsider, like, even if it's just like an alternate universe that's still continuing. Like, I'd like to see a couple more movies in this vein, but I mean, I'm not expecting it. I'm just gonna see what happens. As sad as that sounds.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna try and appreciate it for what it is, because what it is it's an exciting movie with good characters, good CGI, good writing, good music, obviously with all of the Pink Floyd references that we get. Like, this is a very solid film, and one of the questions that you asked me off the air is, do you think it works as a standalone? I think we may have talked about it a little bit earlier in the program, but very very briefly. Um, my answer to that would be yes, minus the post-credit scene. Like, everything else makes sense. Everything else helps it stand on its own 2 feet, and then you go to credits, and then the post-credit scene happens, and it's the mansion, and you're like, oh, well, now it all connects. It's all there together now. And all it took was like that 1 minute. Like, it wasn't even a full minute, probably. Like, it was probably less than a minute. And all of the work that they'd been doing to make that movie stand on its own 2 feet kind of flies out the window a little bit from the post-credit scene. So I think that's what I was most disappointed by, was I wanted something that would allow the movie to kind of stand on its own, and instead of going that route, they chose to make it more about the universe, which I get it, but that doesn't mean I have to like it.
Right. Like, I'm not sure if the sequels would have continued standing on their own the way this one did. It's a huge what if, so we're kind of
Yeah.
left hanging.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And with that, I guess we'll before we go into final thoughts, I want to ask you, what was a favorite quote of yours from this movie?
Oh man. Oh man, that's really tough, cuz like pretty much that entire half hour in the circle is pretty awesome. I would go back and watch the movie again just for that sequence, just for that scene, because it's so captivating. It's so well written. But I think there's a sequence where Mirage and Sam are stuck in a room, and he really hasn't showcased his powers all that much, but when he does in this particular sequence, he works basically like a battering ram to get out of the room and kill the creatures that are coming after them, and it's like a very big moment of truth for him. And then Mirage, in her quippy nature and sarcasm, as they're walking out the door and down the hallway, she kind of like brushes up against his shoulder, and as they're walking down the hall, she says something like, "And I thought cannonballs were only useful in swimming pools."
Yeah,
And
that was a really good line.
it was clever, it was quippy, it was true to form and true to character, and yeah, it made me think about the old days from going swimming and doing cannonballs in the deep end, and I was like, huh, that's something I really hadn't thought of. That was clever. It was just one of those little one-liners that just kind of stood out to me.
Right on. I think my favorite quote was, that moment where they're like stuck in a room and not sure like if they should stay in there or go out and face their fears, and they look out the window and look at the stars, and what I can't remember who says it even after 4 times seeing the movie, but one of them is like, Orion's belt is up there, but it has to be here within us. And I guess sort of like talking about like the powers within themselves.
I know which one I know the line you're talking about. I feel like that may have been Sunspot, because he's just very into astrology and stuff like that. Like, he was trying to pinpoint everybody's star sign during the circle. He's like, "Oh, you're a Taurus. Oh, you're totally a Capricorn, aren't you?"
Right.
Like he seems to be very into the stars. So I feel like that may have been a Sunspot quote. But
Yeah, it probably was. It's hard for me to tell because, like, I knew it was either him or Cannonball. I just couldn't tell who.
yeah, well, that's part of again the whole lighting situation. Everybody was in the dark. So you were just kind of going off of what you were seeing, and all they were really showing was Orion's belt. Like, that's all you're looking at. And then you're just kind of piecing the rest of it together. You're like, oh, that's what he means. Okay. And apparently it was enough to inspire them because they decide to rise up. But yeah, it was. There's always those types of moment of truth types of sequences in movies like this. And I did like this one, but my favorite one is still the one where the Guardians of the Galaxy decide they're going to save the day. And it's like, now I'm standing. We're all standing in a giant circle. Happy now? Like, those moments still bring a smile to my face.
Yeah, I feel that.
Didn't have a whole lot of like big laughs like you would get from something like Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but I think the wit was something that really helped carry this movie along was the witty nature of the characters and the playful banter that they had back and forth. That was enough to liven the mood for just a little bit before things started turning sour again. So good job by the writing staff of keeping things light enough to keep the movie moving forward, but not so light that it distracts from the mood of the film.
Yeah, I agree. Like, on all those points. So, what are your final thoughts on the movie and score out of 10?
Oh, man. Final thoughts. Totally worth seeing in the theater. Like, I could not make my house dark enough to match the dark and intense mood of the nighttime sequences that we get in this film. So it's totally worth seeing in the theater because they make it as blackout, pitch dark as they possibly can. And it really messes with your senses. So if you still have the opportunity to catch this before it leaves theaters, by all means, go and do that. Try and listen to a little Pink Floyd before you go in so you can catch the references as they're unfolding. I did that before my third time, I think. I just listened to like a Pink Floyd playlist, and then I was able to catch some of the stuff that third time around. And just try and embrace it for what it is. It's not going to be an Oscar-winning film. It's not going to be something that people are going to always be writing home about. But it's a solid film, and it's a solid way to send off Fox Marvel and all of its proprietary stuff that's going to be transitioning over to Disney. As I've said a couple of times, it's like an epilogue. We've had the stories, we've had the X-Men stories, we've had the Deadpool stories, we've had all of those, and these are completely different characters set in the same universe, and it's like our way of saying farewell to all of that by getting one last really fun story. And I really don't have that many complaints aside from the pacing and the green jello look of the intestines during that hallway sequence. So I'm going to give it a very solid 8.5 out of 10. I enjoyed this film a lot.
All right. I know this movie kind of became a joke in some circles. Like, people were saying, oh, it's never going to come out. And it got to a point where even the official page for the New Mutants kind of played into the joke. Like, yesterday I saw that they made a post saying we're back, and like the New Mutants would be out August 28th, kind of pretending that it still didn't come out, which I thought was funny.
That was clever. Yep.
But I think it was worth the wait, honestly. Like, I was looking forward to it from the moment I saw the first trailer, and it was as intense and character driven as I was hoping. And I loved the music, I loved the cinematography and the setting, and the spectacles, like all the fights and whatnot, and how the powers are displayed. So I'm gonna give this one a 9.25 out of 10.
That's high praise, man. That's very high praise. There's very little that I give stuff 9 or above to, and this came very close. This came very close. So I definitely see all of those components, but I mean, we both rated this one super high, so hopefully that gives people enough incentive to watch it for themselves. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, for sure. So, Zach, thank you for joining me on this episode. Where can people find you and what you do online?
Oh, dude, the pleasure was mine. Thank you for having me on. I'm usually over at the IPC podcast. This coming week, we're doing stuff related to Superman. So you can probably find our episode about Superman Returns on our show reel, and you can probably find our episode on Man of Steel on the show reel. And we might be doing Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I don't know for sure, but it's all that type of DC related stuff that pertains to Superman. That's kind of the vein that we're in right now. But we do a lot of other stuff too. Top fives, Star Wars, Star Trek. So if y'all are interested in hearing some crazy random thoughts about that kind of thing, then go follow us at IPC Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I am on Twitter as well at Zach the Voice, ZACH the Voice.
All right. And yeah, go ahead and check all that out. IPC is a great podcast. I've been listening for a while.
A long time. Like what? At least 3 or 4 out of the 6 years we've been on. Probably more than that, honestly.
I started in like late 2015 when you guys were reviewing the Star Wars movies in the lead up to Force Awakens.
Oh man, that was our first run through of Star Wars movies. That was a fun time.
Yeah. So as for my plugs, I write novels. One of them is out, a fantasy horror comedy novel, Lemons with My Grain, which also deals with young people and has werewolves in it, so kind of related thematically.
Nice little tie-in there.
Yeah, so people can find details on that at stevenschinder.com and find it on Amazon, and can follow me at Steven Schinder on Instagram and Twitter, and the Facebook page Steven Schinder Storytelling. And of course, you can follow this podcast. We have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/delayed replay. And you can also email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Did we gloss over anything regarding the new Mutants? Let us know. And you will get a delayed reply, probably. And speaking of Marvel movies with Stranger Things actors, Cannonball was in Stranger Things, for those who don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Next episode will be on Black Widow. So feel free to send in thoughts on that as well. All right, without further delay, have a good day.